Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ, and happy to welcome you to today's CUGC Connect with Nutanix. Before we jump in, I've got this great event slide up for you first, just making you aware of all of the events we have going on. We have a lot going on this week, so obviously we have today's webinar. We still have the CUGC XL Central is tomorrow, so if you haven't registered for that, we hope you will. It's a awesome afternoon packed with great content, and we cap it off with a stand-up comic. He's going to do his routine over Zoom. It's going to be really interesting. I don't think I've seen a stand-up comic on Zoom yet. And then also later this week we have another webinar with Liquid. It's a new sponsor for CUGC, so excited to see about their product offering. And then of course also on Thursday, we've got a lot of CUGC local event meetings. So they're all virtual, of course, but a lot going on. So I hope you'll check those out. The link to our events calendar is in the chat for you if you want to pop over there later. All right, so today we are going to be talking about Citrix on Nutanix clusters, and I'm going to dive right in just a bit. First of all, I want to let you know that we are recording this session. You will get a link to the recording. It's going to come to you from GoToWebinar, and it'll come tomorrow afternoon, so be on the lookout for that. Also, we invite you to submit your questions anytime as you have them. We'll probably take some during the presentation, but save most of them for the end. I know Jarian has a lot of content to get through today. So, but type them in as you have them. We definitely want to make sure we get your questions answered. And finally, at the end, I'll have a survey link for you. It's short and anonymous, and just want to get your feedback. Okay, so with us today, and you can see, I think they're pre-COVID pictures, are Jarian Gibson with Nutanix. He's a CTP. He also happens to be one of the leaders of the Kansas City Metro CUGC group, and he is a senior solutions architect at Nutanix. Hello, Jarian. And also, delay with the audio, sorry. Also with us today, looking over those questions for us, is Ray Davis. He is a Citrix technology advocate this year. Congratulations, Ray. You've also probably seen him posting on the CUGC blogs. He does a lot of blogs for us. They're amazing, lots of great content. Definitely check those out when you get a chance. Hello, Ray.
Hey, how you doing?
All right, well, Jarian, I'm going to hand things directly over to you. Let me get the screen over to you now. And here it comes. Maybe.
Are we good? Yep, we are. So thank you and welcome and thank you for joining today. I'm going to go ahead and talk about Citrix on Nutanix clusters. Thank you for the intro. As far as our agenda, I'm going to do a short introduction to Nutanix Hybrid Cloud. We are going to talk about Nutanix clusters overview. Then we're going to focus on Citrix on Nutanix clusters. I'll give you some links for additional resources. We'll have questions at the end, but feel free to ask questions during as well. I'll stop and pause between the different sections to check with Ray and check on the questions. So thank you, Stephanie, for having me, and thank you, Ray, for riding shotgun and helping me with the questions today. So thanks for the introduction. My name is Jarian Gibson. I'm now a staff solutions architect with Nutanix. Everything I do is Citrix on Nutanix. So testing, guides, integrations, and so forth. You can easily reach out to me through Twitter or my email, both here on this slide. Like Stephanie said, I'm a CTP and a co-leader of the Citrix user group community for Kansas City. So let's talk about the introduction to Nutanix Hybrid Cloud. The first thing we're going to focus on here is basically it's our software. Software-based company, are offering one platform, any app, any cloud. So think about how we are transforming to do across not just multiple private clouds, but also to seamlessly go between public and private cloud and multiple public clouds as well. Thinking about a hybrid and multi-cloud strategy So look at our different application services. Today we'll focus on EUC, but our Nutanix Cloud Platform can go across data center services, DevOps services, desktop services, and digital hyperconverged infrastructure services. With clusters, we'll show you how we can do one-click mobility and also have seamless operations across the different clouds, whether it's public cloud, private cloud, multiple cloud. The theme here is going to be hybrid and multi-cloud today. So let's talk about the case for hybrid cloud deployments. And these are some things taken from the Cloud Index back in 2019. But you're seeing here the case for hybrid cloud deployment. So 85% of enterprises continue to rank hybrid cloud as the ideal model. And that's what we're going to talk about today is hybrid and multi-cloud and the different use cases. 73% are migrating applications away from public cloud back to on-prem infrastructure. And so, some are seeing that going full in on public cloud may not be the best use case for them. And that's why, again, we're going to be focusing on hybrid and multi-cloud deployments. And then look at 60% of respondents said security is the biggest factor impacting future cloud strategies, making sure that if they go with public cloud, that it's secure, making sure there's no breaches in data, and so forth. So when we talk about our platform for EUC, we have platform choice, right? Bring your own broker, your hypervisor, and platform. And with Citrix, whether that's going to be the Citrix Cloud Virtual Apps and Desktop service where Citrix manages the control plane, or it's the Virtual Apps and Desktops on premises where you, the customer, manage the control plane, your choice of that, and then be able to bring in the hypervisors that is supported by both Citrix Virtual Apps and the Virtual Apps Desktop services. We have different pricing models, whether it's our capacity-based licensing, CBL, or our per-user licensing for VDI Core, and then linear scale, being able to scale from hundreds to multi-thousands of VMs with linear performance. The linear scale is not just a marketing term, but it's something that we do within our team. Every time there's a change in Citrix versions, we focus on LTSR versions, but Windows 10 versions, Windows Server versions, hypervisor changes, we go through and run these tests to make sure that we have that linear scalability, that when you go from one node to 16 nodes plus, that you have the same performance and density that you would have on that one node. We also offer a complete EUC solution. So in the past, I've done webinars on using Nutanix files, being able to use that for things like profiles, departmental shares, and so forth. So make sure you go out to the CUGC website and look for that under the recorded webinars. Security, our Flow product, and then today I'm going to focus on clusters. So with that, our offering, one cloud, one platform, one offering, EUC on any cloud, and being able to have that mobility, whether it's multiple private clouds, multiple public clouds, a hybrid, a combination of both, and hybrid and multi-cloud as well. Any questions on Nutanix so far, Ray, before I go into clusters overview?
Not that I see yet.
Okay, so far so good. So let's go into Nutanix clusters overview. So when you think about enterprise needs, and I talked about hybrid, multi-cloud, some customers going back from public cloud back to private cloud, but we're looking at, the needs of both public and private cloud. So when you think about private cloud, think about predictable cost, high performance, compliance, greater control. And then when you get into public cloud, elastic, ease of use, choice, and many cloud services. And so what we're doing is we're looking at bridging those two gaps, or those two areas there, for a unified hybrid and multi-cloud solution. So when we think about what is needed from a hybrid and multi-cloud platform, the first thing we're going to talk about is unified platform using consistent constructs and skill sets. So being able to have the same management of pane of management, not having to re-platform or refactor our workloads, seamlessly and easily move across between those different solutions of public and private cloud for a hybrid and multi-cloud experience. And elasticity between the clouds, no lock-in, making sure that I can go from cloud vendor A to cloud vendor B and back to on-prem without any issues, again, without lock-in, refactoring, or reforming. Native integration with cloud networking, not having to worry about any kind of complicated overlays just being able to get direct access to the networking and perform things without any overhead of that. And then license portability, again, being able to seamlessly move between private cloud, public cloud, multiple public cloud vendors, and so forth. So what are Nutanix clusters? So Nutanix clusters delivers the full Nutanix software across public and private clouds. So for a true hybrid and multi-cloud platform, we can use a single pane of glass with our Prism management, our HTML5 console, to have that single manage, that familiarity of manage the same tools, whether you're, today, if you have multiple clusters today, whether it's 2 different locations, that same concept is going to be the same, whether it's your own private data center and then extending out to a public cloud provider like AWS. So you're going to get a true multi and hybrid cloud experience, and we're going to run our AHV software on bare metal nodes in the cloud. So what is hybrid and multi-cloud Nutanix clusters? So you see here extending your private cloud into multiple public cloud providers. Our first release of this has been on AWS. That is in production today. So you can go out there and start leveraging clusters on AWS. We have announced Azure. Right now, we are in a joint partnership to develop a solution with Azure. And it was announced, and it's in development, and we'll have a public preview soon. So when we talk about that, native integration with cloud networking, no networking overlay complexity, easy to manage and deploy. So you're deploying that software through the process. I'll show the console how to deploy things. It's similar to the process of if you bring Nutanix into your data center and go through our foundation process. We have a similar process like that, but going to bare metal nodes in public cloud providers. Migration without performance and compromise, again, it's just AHV in the cloud. It's the same AHV as you would have in your data center on-prem, so no refactoring, using our same built-in tools that we have for data protection and orchestration to be able to seamlessly move that workload from your on-premises data center into the public cloud provider and back, depending on the use case that you're doing with clusters, Nutanix clusters. And then hybrid cloud your way. So you buy the licenses from us for the Nutanix software, you bring your public cloud provider cloud accounts, we charge you for the software, they charge you for the infrastructure, you are in complete control. If you want to go back to on-prem, you can. If you want to go to another cloud provider, once we expand that out to others, you're welcome to do that as well. No lock-in, using our same familiar tools and software that you have today in your data center. So global availability. Since we are live with AWS today, I'm going to start focusing on AWS from here, but this is our global availability. So look at the different geographic regions we have, the SLA availability, being able to choose any data center that AWS has that offers the bare metal nodes that you're looking for. And for this current release, we have 4 offerings today: i3 metal, i3n metal, M5D metal, and Z1D metal. The difference between those is going to be on your requirements for compute and storage, but you see here on this map that we have global availability across different regions, and within those regions, we have multiple availability zones where you can do clusters across those for different availability within that region. I got a question here. Is there any advantage of running Citrix Zen Server on Nutanix? Looks like Ray has answered that. But just to add as well with Zen Server, we're not seeing as much demand for Zen Server. So we're not really going forward as much with Zen Server because all of our demand has been AHV and vSphere. So we're not seeing as many customers on Zen Server on Nutanix today. But then Ray did a great job of answering the rest of that about the hybrid converged and the distributed storage fabric. So thank you, Ray, for taking that question. As far as the instances, I said today we are supporting the 4 different instances. So you see here, based on your compute and storage needs, you can pick from those different ones. And then you see here the availability regions where they're actual available today for the different things across different regions across the world. Notice at the bottom too, we now support GovCloud in US East and US West as well. But again, make sure that you understand which node that you need and where those are available. Later on, I'll talk about our testing for some performance testing we've done for our reference architecture guides. And in those guides, they show all our performance testing. We chose to go with the i3 nodes for those because that was the best balance of compute for CPU and memory compared to the other nodes, along with cost as well. So I'll have some links out there to where you can actually access our portal and look at the reference architecture guides. Now, you're welcome to use any nodes, but these are the ones that we chose because of the reasons I just stated of the balance of compute. Now, as far as benefits to you, seamless app mobility, unified infrastructure management, and lower operation cost, which I will go ahead and go into those now. So the first one is seamless app mobility. Again, it's just AHV, right? There's no change in software. It's AHV. So if you're AHV on-prem, it's seamless across. If you're vSphere on-prem, use our built-in cross-hypervisor capabilities to be able to inject the drivers on demand to replicate those over to AHV and clusters, and then replicate those back to vSphere in your data centers. So again, all the same tools we have today that you see, whether if you're multi-cluster in your data center or multi-cluster across different data centers, those same tools, those same capabilities apply to clusters in AWS. As far as disaster recovery, I'll talk about that too as well. And then the question of, do any of these offerings integrate with ADC, GSLB, standby options if one fail? Yep, same concept. It's just if you had another cluster in another data center you owned, all the same logic applies. Of course, with GSLB and Citrix ADC in AWS or in other cloud providers we support down the road, those wouldn't be physical appliances, those would be virtual appliances, but those same concepts will apply whether it's your data centers or on clusters with Nutanix. How is the strategy in terms of disaster and multi-cloud? So the same thing applies as you would today. Use a replication, and based on the software tier Nutanix you have, whether it's one-to-one or one-to-many, and then build your replication strategy that way. So vSphere supports memory ballooning, but AHV does not. So how would you reconcile sizing? So the main thing there I would say is that you don't want to overcommit memory. That's the main thing I would say there, is that because once you start overcommitting memory, you start to get into some performance issues. Now, as far as app mobility, back to that. So again, it's just AHV, reuse the networking setup and security groups for lift and shift, minimize downtime for near zero outage and full cutover control. Again, it's just our same exact tools that we have today, whether it's protection domains, our leap orchestration, or even using our move to do migration of different hypervisors as well. As far as unified infrastructure management, it's the same pane of glass you have today with Prism and Prism Central. And so you're just that same familiar glass that you see when you manage Nutanix today on-prem. Use our things to automate your operational tasks, COM, use Beam for our management cost governance and predictive capacity across clouds. Again, it's all the same. You'll keep hearing me saying it's just AHV. So it's the exact same. It's no different of running AHV across multiple data centers with Nutanix. And then you look at things, virtual machines, containers, storage, networking security, all the same tools you use today, those exact same tools you'll use with clusters in AWS and other clouds later. As far as lower operational cost, what we do is we allow a functionality called hibernate and resume. So what it does with hibernate and resume is when you're not using the cluster for compute, you can hibernate the cluster to save on the compute cost and have the storage backed by S3. When you're ready to use that compute again, that's when you resume the cluster, it restores those VMs, and you're back up and running. So think about, the burst, using for bursting or DR. You don't want those always running in the cloud to consume cloud cost. So what you're going to do is hibernate those and resume those based on when you need them for bursting or for a disaster recovery event. Again, it's just AHV, so no refactoring. Hibernate without loss of data, and then no additional learning. I'll show you the console because it's pretty much Prism-like, and you go through and easily deploy and manage your clusters in AWS today. One of my coworkers, Dwayne, has a good blog out there on using APIs to automate hibernate and resume. So, automatically wake it up, replicate to it, automatically hibernate it again, and then go through a schedule of doing that. So again, you're not doing ongoing cost of compute when you don't need to. As far as license mobility across clouds, again, I'll talk about licensing options next, but same Nutanix licensing you have today with capacity-based licensing, or you're able to use a couple other pay-as-you-go and cloud commands that I'll talk about here shortly. But again, no lock-in, be able to use those across your cloud vendor of choice once we support more clouds, and no have to worry about licensing lock-in. As far as consumption models, so you bring your cloud accounts. So whether you're using on-demand instances, reserve instances, or convertible instances, whatever you want to do, you bring your infrastructure, you bring your cloud accounts, you pay AWS, and then you pay us for our different licensing options there. Bring your own licensing, so our capacity-based licensing, allocate those on clusters, pay as you go for a monthly subscription model, or go into cloud commit for a yearly term model with clusters. A couple of questions here. Looks like Ray has already answered that. Yeah, so cloud calculation, you use the, as far as the consumption and the compute cost, you would use the calculator for the cloud provider, whether it's AWS or Azure, to give you a good deal on pricing. So thank you for that link, Ray. And then can we get the slides? They'll be shared out after the webinar. So thank you again, Ray, for helping with that.
No problem.
I don't have a timeline for Azure integration. Just know that we're in development, and once that's ready, that will be announced. But that is our next target for our next cloud provider is Azure. It's been announced. I just don't have any target dates to share with you at this time because we're in ongoing development with Microsoft. So what about a customer use case, right? Because everyone wants to know who's using this today and who's doing this out there. We have a number of customers using this today. Our public one that we have right now is Penn National Insurance. They're in financial services. They are a Citrix use case. So you see here that they're using this for disaster recovery, using our tools for disaster recovery like Nutanix Leap and orchestration. They're using the i3 nodes. They're using Beam and Calm for operations and management. And you see here their quote here about it has eliminated all of the problems we were having with our 3-tier systems. It's exactly what we were looking for in a hybrid cloud solution. By moving our DR to AWS cloud, our recovery time has dropped from several days to under 2 hours. And so they've simplified their management, they've simplified their cost, and they've been able to use our built-in tools to have that solution for disaster recovery. And you see here their first batch replication was done in 1 hour with incremental loads taking just 10 minutes. And that's going to, vary on what data you're doing, persistent versus non-persistent, and so forth when it comes to that. But you're seeing exactly here a customer use case. Before I move on to Citrix, any more questions? No questions, and actually we're doing pretty good on time. So Citrix on Nutanix clusters.
Looks like we got one year in. Sorry.
Okay. Medical, hospitals, Epic DR examples. Can we chat about later? Can we chat about? Yeah, we can chat about that later. And that's something we may take offline for healthcare because that's going to be more depend on the requirements and so forth as far as that. But again, it's just AHV in the cloud. So, as long as we meet the other requirements, it's the same if you have multiple clusters for DR with Epic in your data center. As far as workload use cases, so think about Citrix on clusters. So leverage cloud infrastructure, cloud nodes to simply scale EUC infrastructure. So the first use case we're going to talk about, and we saw with the customer example, is business continuity. Be able to build out your disaster recovery sites in a region of your choice, and within that region, use multiple availability zones if you need to, or specify the availability zone that you would like to use. Think about no longer having to manage the hardware and the resources for like power and cooling in a dedicated disaster recovery site, and use clusters for that DR use case. The second two are going to be on-demand elasticity and rapid scale. So think about now during the pandemic, when I know for a while customers were sending a lot of people to remote working, necessarily didn't have the capacity on-prem. So think about if you need to rapidly scale up for users or have that on-demand elasticity for bursting. Think about spinning those up into clusters, being able to connect back to your resources on-prem, and going through and providing that resource to your users to be able to launch their workloads to get in and do their job functions. So burst scale, replicate your base image over for MCS, run the catalog creation wizard. As long as you're back connected to on-prem, which I'll talk about, you can get up and running pretty quickly and be able to have access for those users. And then the other one is migration and test, another use case. So maybe you don't have the size of the environments or the capability to have a dedicated test environment for migrations. Use clusters, spin those up, spin up a new version of virtual apps and desktops, test that. Once you're verified, upgrade or migrate your on-prem infrastructure and swing those users back to on-prem as one use case. If you're doing, if you have a large cluster of AHV, one customer that I've talked to has talked about using clusters in AWS to swing users over there, do the large cluster upgrade without having to worry about maintenance window, and then swing them back to on-prem once that upgrade or maintenance was done. Think about if you're changing hypervisors and you don't have, going from vSphere to AHV or Hyper-V to AHV or Zen Server to AHV, and you don't have the hardware on-prem, move those users to AHV in clusters, and then when that's ready for on-prem, move those back. So different use cases there for migration and test. Hypervisor maintenance, hypervisor migrations, Citrix migrations. Different images you want to test, we have the capacity for, but leverage clusters for that temporary landing spot, and then bring those users back on-prem when you need to, when you're done doing that testing and migration. As far as Citrix, so we do everything that's supported today on AHV. Again, you keep hearing me say this, but it's just AHV. So everything you can do with AHV with Citrix on premises, you're doing the same thing with clusters in AWS. So your base images with MCS, persistent desktops, using virtual apps and desktops control plane, using virtual apps and desktop services from Citrix Cloud. Yes, we do support provisioning. So I know right now provisioning is not supported natively in any cloud vendor, but since we're just AHV, that's all supported in clusters in AWS and other cloud providers as we add them. Use our simple built-in software tools to replicate, extend out to public cloud, and you're up and going from there. We are Citrix Ready. Again, same look and feel as AHV in your data center. There's no difference. Use our existing plugins. And speaking of Citrix Ready, we are certified Citrix Ready for virtual apps and desktops in the cloud, using the cloud control plane or using the LTSR version of virtual apps and desktops. And speaking of that, we follow the same rules. So last year, Citrix announced that depreciation of public cloud support for on-premises current releases. So clusters follows that same licensing or that same support statement. So you can use 1912 LTSR if you want to manage the control plane, or bring that into the cloud. So if you want to manage the control plane, it's 1912 LTSR. If you want to go to newer releases and run the latest current release, that's where you have to use the virtual apps and desktop services. So we follow under the same licensing, the same support statement as you would for anything else in public cloud with that new announcement from Citrix. So again, 1912 LTSR below if you want to manage it. If you want to go newer, virtual apps and desktop service with Citrix Cloud. And then speaking of our integration points, again, the same exact things that work with AHV on-prem is going to work on clusters. So if you want to use the MCS plugin to deploy MCS created desktops or have power management, or use the MCS wizard for full clone desktops, same exact plugin if you're running the customer managed control plane that you would on-prem. If you want to use PVS for the virtual apps and desktop setup wizard for AHV, same plugin as well. Put that on your provisioning servers, run the plugin, exact same integration points, nothing different from AHV in your data center. If you want to use our Connect to Citrix Cloud, to where we do the automation of the cloud connectors and then install the cloud connectors on those cloud install the plugin on those cloud connectors, exact same process as an AHV on-prem, exact same plugin, no different there. And the same thing with Director. If you want to have the monitoring of the machine performance for storage, once you go in Director, same plugin, same integration, all the exact same look and feel, really nothing different. So let's talk about our reference architecture. So on our portal, we have reference architecture guides that we have done for MCS provisioning with both on-prem control plane and Citrix managed control plane. So the first one that we have here is if you're running the control plane as customer managed and you want to run MCS. So what we did was we set up a bursting scenario where all of our infrastructure was on-prem, and we just deployed the workloads into clusters on AWS. So here we have our workloads for both Windows Server for virtual apps and for Windows 10 for virtual desktops. We simulated a bursting situation, check logon times, check, registration times and so forth, and you'll see all that data in our reference architecture guides that we have. We had a VPC that we deployed everything into as far as the workloads. That was connected back to one of our data centers, and we were connected to our VPC over VPN. Of course, you can use things like Direct Connect or SD-WAN, but we had VPN set up for this purpose. And this is what it looked like from a conceptual view, is that basically we just did that bursting of those Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016 workloads, went through, ran our testing, and that's what's in our guides for MCS. With PVS, with the customer managed control plane, same exact thing. The only difference is we put the provisioning services inside of the tenant. Again, we can run PVS inside of clusters. It's just AHV, no change there. And since you always want provisioning close to your workloads and not trying to string those across that VPN connection, we deployed PVS servers inside of Nutanix clusters and AWS. Exact same setup there. When we came to the virtual apps and desktop services for MCS, similar thing, but we made a resource location and used cloud connectors. But from a density standpoint that we saw, that I'll talk about here in a little bit, it's all the exact same, whether it's virtual apps and desktop service or the customer managed control plane on-prem. Same thing with PVS, just deployed the PVS servers inside of the cluster on AWS, and then went through and did our cloud connectors as well for that resource location. So that's kind of the conceptual view of our testing that we did for our architecture guides in kind of a bursting type use case. Now, of course, if you can put domain controllers there for better logon times, that data is in there. We saw a slight difference in logon times, whether the domain controllers were coming across the VPN or the domain controllers were there in clusters. That data is in our reference architecture guides that will show the login difference there. As far as density, again, we tested with i3 metal nodes. And so with Windows 10 2004, we saw about 130 desktops per node using logon VSI and knowledge worker profile. As far as virtual apps, we saw 190 users per node using the knowledge worker profile on Windows Server 2016. Of course, with your applications, your workloads, your use cases, that mileage may vary, but that's the testing, how we do it for our reference architecture guides, is we use logon VSI and go from there. I talked earlier about linear scalability. And so again, our performance testing methodology is we use logon VSI, we use the knowledge worker profile, and then we first figure out how many users we can get on one node. And so for Windows 10, that was 130 desktops. For Windows Server 2016, that was 190 users. And then from there, can we go to 2 nodes, 3 nodes, 4 nodes, 8 nodes, 10 nodes, etc., and see the exact same number of users or desktops? That way we can, like I said, that way we can prove linear scalability as you expand your environment out, as you add nodes. Are you getting the same performance as you would on one node, at 16 nodes in density, etc.? So what does that look like? So here is Windows Server 2016. As you see, going from 1 node to 4 nodes, linear scalability. 8 nodes, we could have gone higher, but our VSI licensing is capped at 1500, and so that's where our max was with 1500 on 8 nodes. If you go look at our reference architecture guide, all the data is in there. We explain that, and it shows you that we could have gone higher if we had a higher logon VSI licensing for that. When it comes to PVS, we did see a little bit of drop down once we got to 8 nodes. We want to get to 1300 before we started seeing a bad user experience. So PVS, a little bit of overhead there. When it came to virtual apps, 1300 versus 1500 on 8 nodes. When it came to virtual desktops, you see exactly the same here, MCS going from 1 node, 2 node, 4 node, 8 node, 10 nodes. And you see that 130 users, based on the node counts for each node. And you see that scales to 1300 users or desktops across 10 nodes. Same thing with PVS, same linear scalability. We didn't see any difference there. 10 nodes, 1300, 1 node, 130. Again, showing that linear capability of those users and desktops on clusters in AWS. Before I go to my console demo here, let me look at the questions. So I have, let me see, 1912 LTSR. Yes, we test the latest on there. We support, LTSR on there, whether it's C1, CU2, or CU3. We use a distributed storage fabric in our software for hyper-converged, and we have things in there like shadow clones that help MCS scale to where they can making sure that all the reads and writes come local, especially for MCS when they're running that. What was the vCPU and memory for the Windows 10 VDIs? We were using the knowledge worker profile with 2 virtual CPU and 4 GB of RAM to answer that question. As far as with the same functionality that you just showed work with Azure, It should be the exact same or similar. The only differences would be any differences in the platform underneath. But as far as AHV on top in our software and all the same replication tools that we use for the seamless mobility, that should all be the same, whether it's Azure or any other cloud provider that we add support for later on. So good question there. So let me go ahead and exit out of my view here and go to our clusters portal. So good question, user profile management. Yes, so you can use files with that, replication with the file storage. As far as profiles, same things we have built in today for files. Use the files DR capability, use the new Smart Sync DR feature that we just released out, use some of the built-in technologies like Cloud Cache or FS Logics, or use any kind of software on top of that to replicate profiles depending on your use case. We do have some RA guides where we did some larger profiles. With our Windows Server 2016, those were 8 vCPU with 32 to 38 gig of RAM on those ones. But we may have later on some testing for larger. I know some of our AMD RAs that we have out will have larger tests in there and show the differences there, but for this one, we didn't have those larger tests today. And again, your mileage will vary based on your workload profile. So let me see the time check here. So we're pretty much good on time. So here's what our console looks like to deploy clusters. The first thing you do when you come into clusters, again, is you bring your cloud account, you bring your cloud information, and then you pick your different regions that I showed earlier on the slide as far as which regions you want to deploy your clusters to. When you create your cloud account, you can enable all those different regions or pick the ones you want to work with. In here, you see that I have an existing cluster. This is the one I use for demos and for customer conversations. And right now, you see it's hibernated. I have 3 hosts. And so for EUC, we recommend starting with 3 hosts, and then you can scale up or scale down the number of hosts in the cluster depending on your needs. Today, it's 16 hosts per cluster, and that's looking to expand later as well. You can do multiple clusters in the same availability zone. You can do clusters across availability zones. But this is what we have today in here. Right now it's hibernated. Again, that's because I don't want to be incurring compute costs. I'm not using the cluster. And so when I'm not using it, it's hibernated. If I go in here and click on the cluster, again, same kind of look and feel as Prism, but different details because we're looking at clusters here. So you can see my cloud provider is Amazon. It's hibernated. You can see this one's in Northern Virginia. You can see, the metal type I'm using. They're none active because they're hibernated. Where they're deployed at, my AHV and AOS versions, my software tier, and so forth. Number of cores, number of memory capacity, the storage, licensing details, and Beam. If I want to go into the specific details, I can go in here and see each node, see the information. If the node was running and the node had an issue, I could come in here and eject the node. The node would automatically get provisioned back with a new node automatically, nothing I'd have to do. I can see my audit trail and so forth. And if I go back to my cluster overview, when I want to wake it up, I just click here on the menu and I can update the configuration and so forth. As far as update capacity, I can click into the cluster, update capacity. I can't do anything right now because it's hibernated, but if I wasn't hibernated, I can go ahead and expand to 4, 5, 16 nodes. Those would all be done in parallel as those get provisioned out. And then when you want to shrink the cluster, you can go ahead and shrink that back, and that's done kind of in a serial fashion, so it can rebalance the workloads and the storage and so forth. You can modify your access policy if you want any kind of public access or what kind of access you want to the cluster. The software tier, files, your SSH key, so you can SSH to your nodes to the CVMs. You can do a scheduled termination. So this is good if you're just doing this for test or demo or just playing around. And if you forget to hibernate it, you can say, okay, I want to make sure this cluster gets destroyed after a certain amount of time, so I'm not incurring cost. And then when I'm not using the cluster anymore, I can terminate the cluster as well. As far as if I want to create a cluster, it's a pretty simple workflow. I just click on here. I click create cluster. The first thing it's going to ask me is the organization that I want to do and a cluster name. So you see here, it gives you a random one. You can, of course, modify that. My cloud provider, today I only have access to AWS. My cloud account, so I pick my cloud account, and then based on the regions I have enabled in my cloud account, it's going to show in here. Again, you can enable specific regions or you can enable all regions. We did ours in Northern Virginia and Frankfurt for our testing. And then once I go from there, I click next. Once I go here, I can use an existing VPC, and this is going to be important because if I have a VPC already set up and have a specific region and availability zone that's already connected back to my on-prem resources, I can pick that one. It will do all the deployment into that VPC for me. If I don't have one and I don't want to connect back to on-prem, but I just want to test out clusters, we can go through and create everything for you. You give us the information based on the region you pick the availability zone, and then go from there. I'm going to click through and just show this where I can pick my different networks that I already have for my VPC and then for my management subnet. And then I can go through my cluster capacity and redundancy. So I can pick the different nodes I need. I start with 3 nodes. If I try to go down to 1, I'll get a warning, or I can go up to 16 nodes. And for the question in the chat, 16 nodes is the only limitation in AWS right now, not with on-prem. So thank you, Ray, if you've answered that, but that's just the limitation there. Or Jared already answered that in the chat. And then my RF factor, if I want my SSH key, use an existing one or create a new one, click next. I can go through here and look at my overview of my summary, go through and read this, a link to our detailed guide. Again, it warns you about 3 nodes, distributing across availability, regions for redundancy, some of the same things you'll see if you want, multiple clusters, multiple availability zones, availability across regions. Once I click create, it will go through and take about, in my testing, it's been about 45 minutes to bring the cluster up. And then once from there, I can start doing things like replicating data over to it, start setting my infrastructure up and going from there. So that's kind of a quick peek of what our management cluster looks like. This is basically your foundation for clusters in the cloud. When we have other cloud providers, the only difference will be is picking that cloud provider and their terminology based on networking and so forth, but everything else will be the similar workflow for that. Any other questions? Looks like that's answered okay so far. So go back to my presentation, do a time check here. I think I'm good on time still. So the next one is going to be virtual apps and desktop service, MCS and PVS, because like I said, we do support PVS in the cloud on AHV, because again, it's just AHV in the cloud. So I have a nice demo here. In this demo, I've already gone through and replicated things like my base image, my PVS server is there, my templates are there. And so now I'm going to go through and use Connectors Cloud built into our systems. This is my cluster at AWS using those i3 metal nodes. I'm going to go through and put in my information for connect to Citrix Cloud. So my custom ID, my client ID, and my key. These are all going to be from your API configuration inside of your virtual app and desktops tenant. So I get those done. I'm going to connect to it, and it's going to go through. And for those who don't know, what Connect to Citrix Cloud does is you provide a sysprep template. It's going to go through and deploy up to 2 VMs for you. Join those for domain. It's going to install the cloud connector, and then you can install our plugin for AHV on that connector to be able to do that integration with the virtual apps and desktop service. In this demo, I did a little bit of extra scripting through sysprep to automatically install our cloud connector as well on our plugin as well on our cloud connector. So you see here, I picked my resource location in Citrix Cloud. I have my template on cluster, my networking. I give it a naming convention to deploy 2 cloud connectors for high availability, the password to those VMs, and then I put in my information to join my domain. Once that is done, that will go through and connect to Citrix Cloud, put those cloud connectors in my selected resource location, and on the cluster, it's going to own that template. It's going to create a couple of those VMs, the 2 I specified, and go through that process. So you see here, I go to my task. Those VMs are going to be connected pretty quickly, and you see they're done. And then the VMs will go through, do the sysprep, join the domain, install the cloud connectors, install our plugin on those cloud connectors. Now that it's done, I'm just gonna go through and verify everything is done. So you'll see here, through this login real quick and verify all the proper components are installed. Again, the Citrix Cloud will install the cloud connector for you, and then some extra scripting. I automated installing our plugin for AHV for the cloud connectors. And so you see here, everything's there. It should be. And then I'll go ahead and check this one just to make sure. And then once that's verified, we'll start spinning some things up. Any other questions in the chat while this is going? No questions so far still, so we're there. As you see here, just verifying the second cloud connector. Once I'm done, you see here on my cluster, I have my cloud connectors running, my templates, those, my provisioning server, my templates for both PVS and for MCS. And so you'll see here that I have my snapshots already created for my MCS catalog creation. So now if I flip over to the Citrix Cloud control plane, we'll refresh. We got my cloud connectors installed in that region that I picked. And then now we'll go to Virtual Apps and Desktops Web Studio. Going through similar workflow that we're all familiar with, run catalog creating for MCS. I'm just going to go ahead and use the new Web Studio. So you see here, nothing yet in here. I'll go through and create hosting connection. And to create that hosting connection, I need to have that installed on all cloud connectors in my Virtual Apps and Desktop service tenant across my resource locations. And so you see here, we'll go through that process. Nutanix AHV is there. Now that I have our plugin installed in our cloud connectors, I'll put the info to connect to the cluster in AWS, authenticate to it, pick my zone name, give it a connection name, and go from there. On questions? No questions there. Replication between clusters looks like that will answer protection domains, or you can use Leap for R as well. I'll have a link to a blog post that I have, Bursting 2000 in under an hour, and that's to go over showing you the protection domain process, replicating your base image from on-prem to a cluster in AWS.
And that when I answered that, I haven't used the DR scenario yet. I'm getting ready to set that up. So I answered it based on just did a Google search.
Yeah. So it just depends on the use case. So if you're going to use a protection domain, that's all going to be in Prism Elements. If you're going to use a Leap DR orchestration, that's all going to be in Prism Central. Then the one thing with that is that you can do recovery plans, so you can boot things up in proper order, do network changes, do script-based action as well as part of those recovery plans. But here's just going through the wizard for MCS, showing you it's all integrated, all connected. Again, it's just AHV, no difference. I'm picking my base snapshot for MCS, changing my VDA version. Like I said, the same exact workflow. It's just AHV, no difference. The only difference here is that instead of you having the hardware in your data center, this hardware is being managed by AWS. You're just managing the software on top. You run naming convention. And then go through. We're good on time. I may just skip forward this because everyone knows MCS works, but what about PS or provisioning? So you see here, it's all up. My delivery group's getting up, it's there. I'm launching a session, CS works. But we all know that works in the cloud, whether you're on AHV or native. So let's go ahead and go to PVS. So as I go to PVS, whoops, I clicked too far forward. So PVS. Now that showed MCS is working, everything's good there. What about PVS, right? So no catalogs there. So for MCS, our host connection is created. That way, and desktop setup wizard is there. I go to our console. I have my vDisk already with Windows 10. I have my target device there that I create the image from. So now through and do the virtual apps and desktop setup wizard. And so we do the virtual desktop setup wizard. Same look and flow as usual. We're going to point to our cloud connector. It's going to prompt us for the authentication to the workshops and desktop service and Citrix Cloud. So we'll put our location in. And of course, with this is going to be multi-factor authentication. So it's going to prompt me for that secondary authentication here to verify. Let me see any other questions. Do we have a schedule reboot task on VDI for on-prem? So as far as schedule reboot, you know, are you talking about the schedule reboot side of the controllers to have that one, or are you looking for something outside of the controllers? Because Citrix natively has scheduled root options inside of it. As far as PVS servers, the Citrix VDAs must reside in the same location. You always want to make sure those are going to be in the same availability zone. You know, if you have multiple clusters, it can be on a different cluster, but you want to have those at least in the same availability zone, you know, and so forth. You don't want to be trying to pull kind of streaming across the availability zone. You want PVS in the same exact availability zone with your VDAs. So good question there. So we go through, I pull my information in. I'm my template, which is a snapshot of my PVS plate. I'm gonna go ahead and select my vDisk. Same process, like I said, it's just HV. Really nothing different from if it was HV in your data center or if you're having HV across multiple data. Let me check the question here. No other questions. Again, just going through the same exact process. In our settings, see what we want for the word. So our settings here, picking our storage container. You know, doing our account creation, same workflow, nothing different, all same look and feel.
Looks like we got one
Verify
question.
my nation.
I'm not for sure.
And the wizard's going to go ahead and do the same things it always does. Create the devices, create the VMs, create the catalogs. You see it's there. Create my delivery group. So it's, you know, again, okay. Yeah, so there are links in here as well for resources. The video will show replicating the templates across clusters with protection domains. All documentations on our portal for using protect domains, leap disaster recovery. It's all there on our portal. Which I link that here once the demo is done. And again, you see it's really different. Just like I said, it's AHV software, you know. But again, instead of you being the of those resources for the hardware, AWS is doing that, and you're just managing the software on top. So do you typically see organizing just update during the day or is it intensive operation that you're done off hours? It all depends. The main thing, update is they're gonna have to log off time for that machine to reboot. You know, we have customers, you know, 6 one way, half dozen the other. But the main thing is that when you select the option, is it to reboot, I'm sorry, to update as users log off. You don't want to force users off during that reboot, and you have those options inside of the wizard. And like I said he does it. It depends on the company, change operations. But the main thing is not forcing that reboot unless it's some kind of emergency patch that you have to do now. Otherwise, as users log off, let them come back in. No change, no desktop service on clusters. If you want to connect back to on-prem resources, if you want to, use, replicate images over, connect back to that infrastructure, come with your AWS account and do a trial. With that AWS account, you have your VPC that you already have set up and plumbed back to your environment. So that's where you're going to connect your resources if you're not. Get access to Nutanix clusters through our trial process. Once you have the cluster deploy, everything's connected, then you can go ahead and start replicating images over. You can start deploying infrastructure on it, whether it's through virtual apps and desktops or the virtual apps and desktop service, and then do all your testing from there. We have options for the trial. The trial is more suited if you want to do your own AWS account and connect resources. The test drive is more if you want to get on the look and feel of clusters and go that way. As far as additional resources, there's a landing page for Citrix that talks about all of our resources for Citrix, Instant On, Privileged Cloud, case studies, white papers. Our portal, that's where you're going to have all of our documentation for clusters, protection domains, DR orchestration, the reference architecture guides, the full data if you want to go read those, our best practices guide to running Citrix on Nutanix. Our clusters landing page, the clusters landing page also has a option for a test drive and going through the process of getting a trial. I have a video out there that's showing bursting 2,000 desktops in under 2 hours, and that goes through the whole process of creating the cluster coming up, doing the initial cluster configuration, replicating the base image for MCS over using protection domains, going through and using on-prem controllers in that bursting scenario to build out 2,000 desktops and connecting to those. So it's all done over that video. So you can see that full process. For those who asked about being able to seamlessly do that option or do that bursting along with replicating that image, it goes through and shows protection domains. We have a blog post out there as far as Citrix Cloud on Nutanix on our hybrid cloud platform. Our Ready page from Citrix. If you want to try out AHV in a non-production use case on commodity hardware, we have our community edition, and you can use all of our plugins for Citrix, test out all this stuff as well using that in a non-production use case scenario. And with that, I am done. I'm pretty good on time here. So any questions? So as far as looks like, yeah, Ray answered a couple about the storage benefits on-prem for Nutanix deployment. The biggest thing we have there is our distributed storage fabric, our software for storage. You're going to get the benefit of local storage with optimized storage as well. So to Citrix hosting connection, it's going to be one storage across the platform. Our performance options that are in there, our redundancy options, all of our protections we have built into there. But one of the nice things we have on top of what's called data locality, to where everything is read writes is local, is that we have a shadow clone. So with that shadow clones, instead of having to read that base image copy, because as you know with MCS, it puts the copy of the base image on every storage location, and in unoptimized distributed storage, that storage location is going to be on one node, and so all the reads and all the network traffic is going to come across that one node trying to read that base image copy, causing network traffic, causing a hotspot on that node storage. What you can do is we have what's called shadow clones. So instead of having to go across that one node, we put a shadow clone copy on each node to where all the reads and writes are coming locally on that node. So there's no going across to a single node. There's no hotspots on the storage. There's no unnecessary traffic. So that's our storage benefits of running Citrix on Nutanix on-prem. As far as that, we have all the other things I talked about as far as our protection capabilities, using clusters. And if you go back and look at some of the CUGC webinars, I have other webinars out there that talks about Citrix on clusters. But in those resources, okay, so yes, so you have console to the VM as well. For that, again, if you're connected back on-prem, you can come across as an on-prem VM to go into the Prism console to get to the VM consoles. Like I did in my demos, I was coming from one of our labs data centers, coming across the VPN and connected to the VPC inside of there. We have our own AMIs and deployments. That's what our console does that I showed you. it goes through and does all of the provisioning for you for clusters in our builds for the OS. Azure, I don't have all the details yet because we're still in development, but as far as the console process and a lot of the concepts, they'll be the same. The only changes will be underneath for specific to Azure. So to answer that question, I will share the slides out and the links out as well as a follow-up email, Sam, to get that. Sorry about the audio issues that were choppy there at the end. Let me see any other questions. It looks like we have all of that. But yeah, we'll make sure the links go out and the presentation goes out to all the registered attendees.
I know one question I get asked a lot, Jarian, that might be beneficial, is a lot of people ask me, do I need to use MCS IO with Nutanix Distributed Fabric? And I typically say no, because the Distributed Fabric, like you said, optimizes stuff. I was curious to know if what do you recommend around MCS IO, kind of like the PVS write cache?
Yeah, so typically we don't recommend using a RAM cache on Nutanix, just because that we have the performance underneath in our storage fabric. And so with that, we typically don't recommend it. And actually, if you go through the catalog creation on AHV, there's no option on the catalog creation side when you're using AHV to use it on the service, the catalog side for MCSIO. So we don't even allow it in our plugin. Now you still can install with the VDA, but we're not going to use it because on AHV you don't. Now, if you're running another hypervisor on Nutanix, we don't typically recommend it. And actually, if you go to our best practices guide, it goes through that and explains that fully. And also too, in our RA guides as well, we're not using any kind of MCS IO or RAM cache operation.
That's good to know.
As far as the question here is, can we use a solution for hybrid cloud? Yes, this is hybrid and multi-cloud. So have your on-premises data center, be able to extend, burst, use DR in the cloud for that hybrid and multi-cloud. So that's the key point here with Nutanix and with clusters, is to be able to do hybrid and multi-cloud. Can Citrix extend its support for control panels deployed in Azure? Is this the case here too? So that's what I said about the public cloud support statement. So it's going to apply to that. So if you want to use the customer managed control plane, that's 1912 LTSR. If you want to use anything newer, that's going to be the virtual apps and desktops control plane hosted by Citrix. So depending on what your software path is today for Citrix, whether you're a long-term service release or if you're CR, that's where that comes into play. And there's a CTX article that reposted, I think, as an answer already to talk about the public cloud support. We're seeing as public cloud because this is running on public cloud as far as the Nutanix cluster side. On the on-prem side, you can run anything you want, but in public cloud, we are bound to that support statement by Citrix. So I think that's all the questions. Stephanie, do you want to take it back to close out the webinar?
Yeah, and I know we had some details about a giveaway, so let me pull that up really quickly. Hold on one second. Main screen, make sure you have the one that you need. There's always too many windows open. Okay, I think nope, you're not even seeing it yet. Okay, now do you see? There it is, yay.
Yep, I see it now.
And let me see if I can come back. GoToWebinar kicked me out earlier, which was interesting, but it hasn't happened to me in a while, but here I am, I'm back. Thank you so much. That was really great, a lot of information, and I know there was a lot to get through in an hour, and so I know you guys will want to revisit that, so definitely look out for the recording tomorrow. If you opted in for a chance to win the Lego Star Wars Millennium Falcon, I will pull the registration report as soon as I close out the webinar. I like to give everyone a shot because some of you register as we're underway, so it's only fair. I pull the registration report, I use Google random number selector, I pick a number, and that's the winner. So want to give everyone a chance. So as soon as we're done, I'll pull that person, I'll notify you by email, and we'll announce it on Twitter. So be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, I hope you all have a fabulous rest of your day. And thank you again, Jarian, and thank you, Ray. Lots of great stuff today.
You're welcome. You guys have
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
All right, well, we'll see you guys hopefully at another CUGC event this week. There are a lot of from you to choose from this week, so hopefully we'll see you tomorrow, Thursday. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.